Okay, well, I guess we can get cracking. So thank you very much for joining us today. We at Profi are delighted to be hosting this panel discussion on redefining peer review, the role of AI in transforming scientific publishing. My name is Dr. David Harvey. I am an astrophysicist and group lead at EPFL in Switzerland and the head of research at Profi. I will be moderating this discussion today. As many of you know, peer review is a central pillar of our scientific process. Its objective to ensure the publication of trustworthy and robust science. In order for peer review to achieve this goal, it must be fair. This includes guaranteeing independence and objectivity and not biasing or discriminating against any demographic or gender. It needs to be of high quality and relevance, critically examining the research laid out, and finally, it needs to be efficient and timely. The time period for a piece of research stays relevant is becoming increasingly short, particularly in times of pandemics, climate change, and artificial intelligence. As such, peer review needs to keep up with the research, otherwise it becomes a bottleneck to progress. With open access driving huge numbers of submissions to journals and increasing competition for research grants, peer review is coming under increasing pressure. What we at Profi want to ask today is there a better way? Do we improve the system that we have, or do we need a complete overhaul? And does artificial intelligence have a role in this future? With that, I would like to introduce the panel. Today we have Boyana Konforti. She is a Director of Strategic Initiatives at F1000, who is now part of Taylor and Francis. With a PhD from Stanford in biochemistry and decades of experience working for a variety of publishers, she has a unique viewpoint of the entire publishing pipeline. She is an open science advocate and enthusiastic supporter of the publish then review model. Marco Casola, the publication manager for the immunology and ophthalmology portfolio of Cargo Publishers, is the co-lead within Cargo's internal open science task force. He is spearheading many new innovations in peer review at Cargo, who themselves fund innovation in publishing every year. Thirdly, we have Mads Rijdal, who is a visionary with a rich history in creating trend-setting AI solutions, including his pivotal role at Siri and his endeavors with Unsilo and currently Paperflow.ai. Mads has over 2 decades of experience in leading innovative projects and developing foundational patents on search technology and recommendation systems. And finally, we have Fernando Patat, a distinguished astronomer currently leading the peer-reviewed access to the observational time at the world's largest telescopes. He is responsible for the robust evaluation and selection of thousands of telescope proposals each year. So with that, I would like to begin by asking the question, how are we going to tackle the issues that we are currently facing with peer review, and what new innovations is going to make a difference? Boyana, maybe I could start with you.
Well, I don't have a short answer, that's for sure. There are a number of problems to my mind, primarily because scientific publishing still operates as if we are putting out print issues of journals. And what I mean by that is that the primary mode of disseminating, of evaluating and curating the work is all linked together under a journal title that acts as a proxy for quality. And we know that there are many, many problems with this system. And there are ways in which technology could be better used to communicate science more rapidly, more easily, and certainly more cost effectively. And so I think part of that solution is to decouple the dissemination from the evaluation and from the curation. But scientists are a conservative lot, and they like to do things the way they've always done them. And while they agree in principle with the ideas of open science and open access, they're very much wed to this idea of having to tell a story with their work and then publish it in the most high-profile journal that they can. And I think if COVID has taught us anything, is the importance of getting the work out quickly and getting it evaluated by peers as quickly as possible. I think that is very much why I'm as enthusiastic as I am for the publish first, review second model that F1000 uses and has been using for the past 10 years. And we are continuing to make improvements on that model. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of the other speakers. I have some ideas of how we can make the review process easier and faster and more efficient for the reviewers and obviously for the authors themselves, and also to make it much more transparent so that everyone has a chance to consider the reviewers' viewpoints and how the authors respond to those viewpoints. I think I'll stop there and let someone else.
That's great. Already points even I want to jump on there. So that's fantastic. Mads, maybe we can come to you next.
Thank you, David. So I think you've stated the sort of the obvious shortcomings of the current system. I think if to summarize from my angle, it is the enormous delay that is now customary, especially for first-time authors or young researchers that will try to get into the highest possible impact journal and may see several rejections before they finally get accepted. They will not just see a 12-month delay, but maybe potentially an 18 or 24-month delay before their paper is published. I think, of course, we have to recognize the huge value that journals are adding to the general consumption of content in the research space as curated and trusted canons in their fields. But I also think, and I agree with Boyana, that we need to move to a model that is collaborative, perhaps, or at least a publish first and review later, because we are at the brink of an onslaught of synthetic manuscripts that is completely impossible for journals. It will be impossible for journals to handle. So in my view, we haven't seen even the tip of this iceberg, and we need to gather more resources around this process if we are to create an ecosystem that will function 10 years from now. So I'm very interested in how AI can be deployed in service of this. Not generally of a school that thinks that AI has supernatural abilities. I think if working with machine learning in practicality teaches you anything, it is that we still have many of the same problems that we had 10, 20, or 30 years ago with accuracy. But of course, the new systems are super amazing on some very special use cases. And I think we are currently trying to build a nice product that I can talk a little bit about later that tries to deploy AI to help basically facilitate content to a larger audience and moderate a conversation around it. We do firmly believe that the human mind is where research and innovation takes place, but we need automated systems around us to perform efficiently in the future. So that's my sort of general take on this.
Great, thank you, Mads. Maybe we can come to you, Fernando, now as an active scientist. You can maybe react a little bit about Boyana and give your own perspective as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. Yeah, this is going to be a very interesting discussion. So, of course, I can bring in my experience, which is a little bit different from the one of the publisher, meaning that each time we get very large chunks of applications, as 1,000 at a time, and as opposed to journals where there is an virtually an infinite number of pages, there are not infinite number of nights at Telescope. So the problem is in our case is that the very high oversubscription is the killer. Ideally, we would like to give the Telescope time to everybody, so everybody gets the chance, because a proposal for Telescope time is not a paper. You are proposing to find something. You still have to find something. In a paper, typically, you publish something that you have already found, and you want the others to judge whether it's good or not. In our case, you judge basically ideas. And so we have this big chunk of things. In our case, the process is pretty fast because we have to send the things to the telescope, but definitely we all face the same problem. We have far too many applications and not enough resources to allocate all of them. Now we have place a big burden on the reviewers, and the solution we found to cure this problem was distributed peer review, which is quite novel in astronomy. I don't know about other fields, but in our case, the applicants themselves then become reviewers. So they get 10 proposals for each of the submissions that you do. And this redistributes the load in a democratic way to the community. And if you put more proposals, you get more proposals to review, so that there is also self-regulation mechanism. Yet we have to face what we all face here, which is the subjectivity of the process. So I have done a lot of studies using our, hundreds of thousands of evaluations that we have in our system. The observatory has been operating now for 60 years. So we have, and we call for proposals twice per semester. So we have a huge amount of data, and we can see all the correlations inter-panel, outside of the panel. And what comes out is that the correlation factor between two reviewers seeing the same proposal is 0.2, which is rather close to random, say. So, which means that either you increase by a large factor the number of reviews so that you raise up the wisdom of the crowd thing by killing the Poissonian noise with this, which is unfeasible because it will take 100 reviewers to reduce it very much, or you find something else, or you accept simply that it is very close to random. So, one problem we have cured because the number of proposals was too big, and we have introduced distributed peer review, which at the beginning we cut by 50% the load on the panel. So we send the small requests to the DPR review and the larger request to the panels. We have 80 people that do that twice a year. Still, the subjectivity is there. And so AI is probably a tool that is going to help at least the pre-selection. Now, another idea that we have put forward, but each time I mention it, and I think it's going to happen here today as well, I'm shouted at, is introduce at least partial randomization to the process. So all the governing bodies of my organization and the users committee and all of that, they revolt very vocally when I come up with these ideas, but certainly other institutions have done, the National Science Foundation in Switzerland and the Volkswagen Foundation in Germany. For tiny bits of the allocations, they are using semi-random. But still, before you do the randomness, you have to do a pre-selection. Otherwise, it really becomes a lottery, and you could submit 100 papers in your case, or 100 proposals in our case, just to increase your chances. So how do you do this pre-selection? AI may be, with some criteria, may give you a threshold, and you throw away, what the system judges is too crap, and then you pass it to the humans. I can mention this here. It's not public yet. We have done an experiment in this semester. We have taken 10 proposals submitted by ESO staff because we needed to have their agreement to use their proprietary, intellectual proprietary data to produce these proposals. We resubmitted them identical, and we also asked ChatGPT to rewrite them, and we submitted them as well. So we sent into the system 2 sets of proposals by humans and a rewritten version by ChatGPT version 4.0. Because we know that people in the community are using ChatGPT to improve their proposal. So this is the first step, and we are going to compare, we're going to do 2 comparisons, how the panels have judged the same. They don't know, they didn't know about this, right? So they don't know what it is. And the same proposals have been distributed to different people in the community through the DPR. And then the second thing we're going to do is ask ChatGPT to judge its own proposals and the proposals written by the humans, the same proposals, trying to see whether we can gauge this against what humans said. This is, of course, only an exploratory experiment, and each time I mentioned that we could deploy this in the future, so giving an aid to the reviewers through ChatGPT or any other AI mechanism, I am again shouted at even more vocally because I'm on board with my predecessors here. There is this ethical, and there is also, I think, some reactionary attitude against the machine judging humans, which I think it is fair, and we have to keep it in mind. But we have also to accept the fact that artificial intelligence is coming in. Now, when you get a written text, you're never going to be sure it was completely written by a human. I see recommendation letters, I see CVs, and when I know the person, I know that this letter was not written by this person because her or his English is not that good. And also the way it is phrased is, you know, it's very good. And since, especially in the case of proposals, and then I close on this, in the case of proposals, it is very important how you present your idea to convince whomever is to judge it, to give you the expensive telescope time. ChatGPT can do a great job already in improving your style, especially if you're not a native.
That's great. It's interesting that you're doing these tests with ChatGPT. That's really interesting. I think we'll definitely be coming back to using whether or not we should be using ChatGPT as an aid for peer review to judge the quality of manuscripts on proposals. It's something that we'll be really keeping an eye on. So maybe I come to you, Marco, and present the same question, but also maybe you could, has Karga thought a lot about or ChatGPT or anything like this?
Yeah. Well, we all know the problems of peer review, time consuming, reviewer overwhelmed, and of course, as a publisher, we are asking ourselves what can we do better with this. We tried different things. I tried different things in the past. Completely open peer review from submission to acceptance at UCL Press. That model, I think, is one of the one that I prefer, where you know, it's kind of submit first and review after, but with an editor controlling everything. So we're publishing from the first submission to the reviewer review reports, authors reply, and so on. That was very well uptaken by the environmental scientists. I am not sure if doctors or other fields, medical or engineering, they would uptake it as good as the environmental scientists. On the other hand, AI is coming, and I would love to see it applied to peer review. I think at this stage we're not there yet. What do we do with our reviewers? We actually don't allow them to use ChatGPT or any tools to actually review the paper. We allow them to rewrite the report in a more polite way, for example. That is okay. But for the moment, I see AI with a combination of humans always to assess a paper. There was this company Stat Review, and they were doing something quite good, checking all the statistics with an AI tool. So removing that burden from the reviewer, and then the reviewer could really focus on the real problems of the paper, if the scientific question was answered, and everything was done properly. So I think at the moment a combination with AI and human is let's say the best solution we can find. In the future, with better tools, I won't say no to an AI reviewers. Maybe always in combination with an editor assessment on top of it, so we can have a kind of double layer of peer review. I will drop it there. One of the things that I really like is, or I'm trying to develop, is a kind of live peer review instead, where you can have first round of peer review traditionally done, and the second round we can gather all together reviewers, editors, and authors, and have them discuss the paper and have a decision way quicker than normal. So these are my hints. We're also working on a pilot at the moment with kind of mentoring peer review. It's nothing new. There are other companies doing it for some years now. I think it's a good idea to get the early career researcher in as early as possible, teach them how to peer review with a mentor that could be their professor, their postdoc supervisors, or anybody that has more experience. And then you share the burden peer review, and everybody gets recognized. Also, the last thing, we need to find ways to recognize reviewers that the reviewers like. We all know that pay peer reviewers is not really ethical, or may come some breaches of trust and so on. So other ways are always welcome. There are credit systems, but I don't really see anything really working good. Probably discounts on future publication or discounts on APCs might be more interesting.
Thank you, Marco. That's really cool. It's really good, interesting to hear all the innovations that are happening at Cargo. I want to come back to this. Everyone keeps the common theme here I've noticed is this continual publication, this publish and peer review. And if we take it to the extreme, Fernando talks about judging ideas. So you could have a situation where the peer review is continuous from the idea all the way through to publication, and people continue to have peer reviewed over from the inception of the idea to the writing of the paper through the whole process. However, it's been noted a lot of times in the media that news channels often pick up on ideas and preprints that are maybe aren't actually being peer reviewed yet, but they're exciting and they're new. How would Boyana, how would this situation come about where you protect the scientific integrity by having something that's not peer reviewed and likely to be picked up on by journalists if you have a continuous from judging of idea all the way through to publication?
I think what you do is you actually expose journalists and the public to the actual process of science. This is how science functions. There is not really a special stamp, to my mind, when a paper has been reviewed, meaning that it has had, 2-3 people take a look at it. They've made some comments. The authors have made some changes, but that certainly does not in and of itself make that paper more reliable than a preprint on a preprint server where the author has decided they want to put this work out. They're willing to get comments from everybody else, and they may or may not submit it to a journal after they receive comments. So I think it's worth pointing out that all of science is provisional. That's how we function. And at any point in time, a paper represents what we know at the moment. And it's not meant to be what we know forever. And the fact that it's been peer reviewed doesn't necessarily mean that it's any more or less trustworthy. I think when comments are visible, open, and transparent to everyone, then people who are reading the paper, readers, can then judge for themselves how convinced they are of the work represented in the paper. And the only other point I would make is that, typically papers have many different techniques, and any one reviewer is probably not an expert in all the techniques being used. And it would be so much better if we could get experts to review different parts of the paper as opposed to the paper as a whole. And that way people will know, okay, figure 1 seems to be quite robust, but figure 3 perhaps is missing some controls. And that's okay, right? Yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that the entire paper should be accepted or that the entire paper should be thrown out because of that. So that's a long answer to.
No, sorry, Matt, you had your hand raised.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely want to point to the exact same things that you just mentioned, Boyana. I think the publishers today are like speaking in tongues. They are at the same time trying to promote preprints and make their authors submit preprints so they can garner traction for manuscripts that they might want to publish later, while peddling a story that you cannot really trust peer review or cannot really trust preprints. You have to wait for the final article because that is essentially the truth. And because that's their financial model, they have to make people buy the peer-reviewed version. And I think that is a perversion of science, and it's doing science a disfavor. We need to realize that everything is always just a hypothesis. And I think nothing illustrates that more clearly than what happened with, what was it, LK99 a month or two ago, which was debunked within, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks, because it was on archive, and people who had the lab facilities to test the findings and try to replicate did so. That invalidation wouldn't have happened in peer review. It would have caused a 12-month delay, plus the time it would take for that dissemination to actually reach people with the right lab facilities. So the argument here goes that the sooner we can get stuff out, the sooner we can collaborate, and the community can collaborate on validating or invalidating new findings. And I think that is the essence here. We need to move to a model that is appropriate for the speed of research in many, many domains. Of course, some domains move at a slower pace, but certainly in computer software, where I'm sitting, and across many of the STEM categories, we need to move a lot faster, and perhaps in smaller iterations that are more readily verifiable. I think that's one of the lessons that maybe I was hoping we could learn from computer science, where like everything is readily testable. I realize it's a lot easier when you just download code from GitHub and press run, and if it works, it works. That doesn't really apply to many other disciplines, but I think we have to learn and appropriate that that simplification of iterations and making reproducibility a standard element of publication.
Marco, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, just adding to Boyana comments on the journalists and preprints and also general public here. I think we have to educate from a publisher point of view. You know, we all know how peer review works. We know the insights. We also know that it's not perfect. An article can be retracted after peer review, but we need definitely to educate the public if we want to move to publish first and review after. So the actual public understands that science is working this way. It's an hypothesis, and then somebody else come up with a better experiment, and it may debunk or confirm the findings. So that I think is maybe is a little bit on the aside of this discussion, but I feel that we need to fill the gap between scientists, publishers, and the general public.
But how do you see the process between now and this future you're talking about, when the public is readily educated? Shouldn't we just tear off the Band-Aid and get started?
Yeah, for me, it's fine. For let's try to some disruptions, and let's see how it goes. And also from the publisher point of view, we are open to new models. If there is a new way of doing peer review that instead of 3 months, it takes 1 month, it's better for everybody. And publish more articles, everybody's happy here. So.
I think there's also.
Sorry, I was just going to say, bring in Fernando here. If you want to bring in a system that's educating the public and understanding how this works, is AI something that we're ready for in peer review, given that no one understands it?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Before I reply to that, I'd like to comment on the previous thing, at least in my field. And admittedly, if you do a mistake or you publish something wrong in astrophysics, nobody's gonna die. So, in medicine, in genetics, this is very much different. So I personally am against publishing first and referring after. And in our case, this already exists. In astrophysics, you can place your preprint on the web, and everybody, even in well-recognized places, and say it has been submitted or presented to a conference, or even out of your own initiative. So people can have access to that, and then you can see the review thing. Now, in general, I am not against this. However, this puts certainly some concern on the quality of what gets out into the public. Personally, I am not very much concerned about what the general public thinks about the results and what the journalists pick, because we have seen examples in which even papers highly quoted and refereed, they are presented to the public in the wrong way simply because the journalists don't know. Now, the question is, would AI help the journalists to understand better what we publish and what we want to say? That's a separate thing. So now you can take your APJ paper or Nature paper, put to ChatGPT and just give me a summary that everybody would understand. And that thing is already possible. I know people here that instead of reading a paper, they throw it to ChatGPT and they get a summary of the most important aspects and compare it with other results. And I guess the journalists could do the same.
So Boyana, I cut you off there. Boyana, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I was wondering what the other panelists think. I'm going to say something that I think is quite controversial, and that is, I don't think every paper needs to be reviewed. I think there are many papers that are solid papers. They move the field forward in more of an incremental way, and I don't mean to have that sound derogatory. They are not changing the field, but it's important for that work to get out. What I would argue is, even if it doesn't get reviewed, if people can then build on it, if other scientists can see the work, build on it, reproduce it, have some way of showing that they have been able to reproduce the results, then that is a better model. I think the peer review time and energy should be saved for articles that are potentially game-changing or will really change the direction of the field. And if reviewers could spend more time, with those kinds of papers, it would free up a lot of time because they're not reviewing all the other papers. We are publishing an enormous number of papers, and many of them, to my mind, do not need peer review. And what you want instead is for others who build on the work to somehow be able to comment on the paper and say, yes, we were able to reproduce this, or actually we had to change X, Y, and Z, and then we were able to reproduce it. That is all incredibly valuable information for the scientific community.
Mats, you had your hand up. You wanted to.
Yeah, it was a thumbs up, actually. I thoroughly agree with this approach. I do believe that we need different mechanisms for the redistribution of resources in this space. And I think we should just deploy some of our sort of collaborative technologies to help do this. I think there's some problems with the way dissemination is currently happening. In my space, people don't wait for things to come out peer-reviewed in journals. We just read stuff on archive, and that's all fine, except of course we would like to have a way to comment on things more sort of easily, and a way to essentially see what other people are thinking about this. And presently that function is handled on the platform formerly known as Twitter. A lot of people are fleeing it now for reasons that we shouldn't discuss, trying to find alternatives that may or may not be suitable to the particular needs of the community. But I think the biggest problem with using social media to do essentially the boosting and the distribution of attention is that we end up looking at the same 5 or 10 papers all of us. And that is going to stifle innovation across the board if we rely on social media ranking to essentially direct our attention. So I think we need a breadth first approach where we can skim more papers and decide intuitively or by serendipity what to read the full text of. And that's kind of one of the solutions that we're currently tinkering with in our new startup.
So it's interesting because it seems that what to read, how to read is something that's an important part of the peer review process, whether it's like understanding whether a paper is an incremental paper, something that's just that maybe doesn't need peer review. That's a very controversial thing. I like that. Or if you're just an everyday scientist looking for papers out there of interest. And, you know, ChatGPT is being used to find, you know, summary papers, review papers. So is it okay to change the words of scientists in this way? Is it something that we'll be happy with the community, the way that we be reading science in an indirect way? And are we happy with that going into the peer review process, whether it's defining something that's not going to be peer reviewed at all or something that's now seminal? Maybe we can talk about that. Marco.
I think it's very field dependent because I mean in informatics software development it's easier. You can try to reproduce the experiments just running copying the code as you were saying, Matt, but for I don't know, microbiology or a trial for a medicine, it's a different set of things that you have to do. So I think here is something that we need to check on different fields. Some of them will be all right, some others not. Yeah, that's the problem that I see. For the point, you know, not all the papers should be reviewed or not. It really depends. I mean, if we want to publish, you know, sound science papers, then an AI tool can definitely check the robustness of the experiments, the statistical value, and so on. If we're really evaluating, you know, novelty and so on, then we need a human to check that. So again, my view is a combination of you know, an editor with a vision. A lot of editor-in-chiefs, they're very good at this. They can see through the abstracts and see the future application of an experiment or a study. And again, AI tools that can just check the correctness of the experiments.
Yes, Matt.
I think we also need to sort of recognize the tragedy of the status quo. I think a lot of scholarly research shows that the difference between submitted preprints and published peer-reviewed articles is radically diminishing. And I've been dealing with reviewer search tools and various ways to help editors automatically discard or invalidate submissions because it is very, very, very difficult with the current resources available to do proper peer review. I'm not saying it's not done, but I'm saying that there's no way we can keep up, and we have to find a model that does this in a different manner. And I think we have to allocate the resources for doing thorough review. And let's not kid ourselves, like peer review does not presently include replicating findings or having access to a lab setup that allows you to review or the data or even run the algorithms that were used to find correlations. That is not currently done. And so we shouldn't, I think, kid ourselves that we're missing out on a whole lot of stuff by doing by maybe opening the floodgates and finding other ways to allocate in-depth analysis and resources to properly validate or invalidate findings.
So if you had all the you mentioned having sufficient resources a few times, Matt. If you had all the resources that you wanted, what would you be doing with them? Would you be investing this time into developing AI that can safely and robustly review them, or would you be putting it into developing a new way of peer review altogether?
I think we need a hybrid approach. I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I think we have institutions that are like contributing immense value right now, but we need a way to as Boyana also suggested, we need a way to direct resources the right place. We need a way to essentially allow things to pass through unhindered or maybe even unnoticed. If it's incremental research that doesn't, or non-incremental research that only proves stuff we already know, that is not going to move the needle anywhere and doesn't really require resources for validation. And so I think I would suspect that the large majority of manuscripts out there today are salami publishing, or people, young researchers contributing to a field at the same time as the same finding is being submitted elsewhere. And all of these things are an inefficient use of our editorial and reviewer resources. So I think we need a hybrid model, and I'm not saying I have the solution, but I think we need to reconsider some of our core assumptions here. And I think it's super important also to not be afraid of exposing the general public to the inner workings of science. I think that is maybe the biggest mistake that we could make. And I think we have to assume that the people looking will develop some kind of a competence over time. And of course, there are always controversy, and of course, there will always be people with shady motives. But I think we can outnumber them if we group together and using the right tools.
Maybe I could bring in Fernando here. There's a lot of talk about making the review process open and keeping it transparent in that way. In terms of the way that the proposals are done with ESO, it's all relatively insular and direct, and there's no release of the information, if I'm correct, right? Has that been something you considered as part of the process of peer review?
It depends on to what extent you mean sharing information. At the moment, we don't share anything which is related to the review. So the comments of an approved project are not published. I took a note. This is something to consider. So I got this idea today. There is intellectual property, of course, because a proposal is not like a paper. A proposal typically, the applicants do not want to publish it because there are ideas which could be used in the next years and you don't want to make them public. And so publishing the comments of that proposal without the proposal itself would not work very well. But I took note of that because that is, of course, an interesting idea. I like to comment a little bit on the previous point. The reason why we are here today, I guess, is because we all have too many items to review, each in our own field. We have too many for the resources that we have. So the problem is upstream. So the question is, why do we have that? Part of the reason, at least in my field, is that because you are forced to say something, and not because you have something to say. So meaning that this goes in the direction of Boyana. Okay, many of the things that we get should not even be reviewed because anyway they don't lead anywhere. They just give a small contribution, and therefore you just let them go through. But the problem is more general. I would say that we have been entering in a perverse system by which all of us are forced to publish too much without having too much to say. And this comes to the expenses of everybody because this puts a load on everybody. On the other hand, put yourself in the shoes of a young PhD or a young postdoc. If you don't publish, you perish. I would really like that this is not the case. Albert Einstein should have published only one paper, 1916, and that was it. Would have been sufficient to make all his own career and a great contribution. While each of us, I have 170 papers published in refereed journals. I'm nowhere near to Einstein. So, you know, how does that compare? So there is something wrong higher up. I don't know whether artificial intelligence can help, because the next step is that we ask artificial intelligence to pose the questions that we should address. And there will be very few. And so very few projects, very few papers. Very, very provocative.
Mads, you want to comment? Oh, yeah, I think you might be muted.
Sorry, I'm trying to give way to other people also, but I think there's no hope that we can reduce the the amount of submissions. I think I think back in 2005 or 6 that China passed 1 million new PhDs every year coming out. So I don't know where they are today, but I would suspect they're probably closer to 2. And all of these people obviously want to be published in leading high impact journals. So there is no turning back the clock on this. So we have to find a new approach, a new setup that allows us to help each other out and to incentivize people to do the right thing.
Great. I think I'm going to bring in a few questions. We have some statements we have from the Q&A. As time's going on. This is, I think, your comment on not everything needs peer reviewed is probably the central thing that's picked up a lot of things here. So Duncan Nicholas has said, although the scientific value may be sound, the review process can help enhance the way it's conveyed and teased out more implications and insights that can be incorporated to make the paper more effective and efficient to adding an artifact of knowledge to the field. So I know from personal experience that when I get peer review, my papers get better. And that process would be lost if you didn't have these papers weren't being peer reviewed, and therefore the ideas might not get focused on as much. Can you maybe comment on that?
Right. I completely agree that papers are improved with peer review. What I would say is, given the fact that reviewers are so completely overwhelmed with how much they are asked to review, that we take it upon ourselves as authors to actually send it to some of our colleagues. Maybe send your paper to some of your more critical colleagues, get comments from them. They'll give it to you, most likely, and then you can improve the paper before you put it up on a preprint server. You also have the chance to improve it over time, right? When it's on a preprint server, there are various versions that you can upload. And if you do over time, when you're giving posters or talks at scientific conferences and people suggest things or ways in which you can improve how the paper is written, you can do that. And I think having the idea that there are multiple versions of a paper and that it can happen throughout the life cycle of the paper. It doesn't stop when it's published. That's why I prefer getting it out quickly and then having the chance to have comments made and authors to be able to amend their manuscripts.
Marco?
Just a couple of comments. The first one, yeah, on the pre-review or pre-published review by colleagues, I would love that. If a paper comes in already reviewed by somebody, it's not an independent reviewer, of course, but it's somebody else. It has to be honest, and critical. That's the main thing. I don't know if we can achieve it in reality. The other point on that you were making, David, the papers definitely get better. Some papers that get really better. So the provocation here would be: shall we add reviewers as authors or co-authors in this case when a paper is reviewed and it gets substantially better? I don't know where to put the threshold, of course. When it's just a review or the reviewer adds some contribution, but that can be a way of incentivizing reviewers to review the paper. If you can kind of promise, then then you will be added as author as well. I don't know if somebody tried it or tested it anywhere so far, honestly.
So yeah, I think a lot of the questions are around this don't need peer review, but I'm going to go back to a question on or a comment by Virginia Valian about addressing social sciences and linguistics, where some submissions should not be published, period, because of the major methodological problems. Second, the time course can be very lengthy in replicating a finding, if it is possible at all, given the sometimes daunting demands of particular human populations. So that's the broader question of, can these AI methods and or otherwise be a broad sweep, or do we have to pick and choose, and can they be applied to things like social sciences? Mads?
I think validating choice of methodology, or at least discarding the most obvious methodological errors, I think is something that is within reach. I'm not saying that we should necessarily block, but we can certainly, I think, already create automated systems that will pick up on some of the most obvious mistakes and some of the more sort of factual requirements of a particular journal or domain. So I think that's within reach. And if it's not today, then it will be soon. So all the objective sort of verifiable background assumptions, I think, is something that we can potentially automate in I'm not saying in our lifetime, but in the next decade. So I think that I'm hopeful for that. But we also need to figure out where to deploy this filter, because it could easily, and that's some of the technology that I help produce, be deployed in service of journals. But if we want to move to a post-publication review model, then probably it needs to be deployed elsewhere. And I think that will be probably preprint servers who currently have some checks and balances and some forms to be filled. They might want to they might have to beef up their acceptance process.
Okay, would anyone else like to make a comment on how this is appropriate for social sciences? Maybe Boyana, do you have maybe?
I mean, certainly I think different disciplines need to, as a community, come together and decide what works best for them. I do not think that what works in the life sciences or in chemistry or in physics necessarily work in humanities and social sciences. So I think it is really important to listen to those communities, understand what their pain points are and what their bottlenecks are, and how they would like to see things move forward in the future.
Okay, great. I think we're coming. But
Matt,
is there a superset of concerns or filters or collaboration formats that we could and should all agree on? I think maybe that is the larger question, because we will have I guess the promise of adopting some new a distribution mechanism upfront and a review mechanism post-distribution. I think we would have to do something that works across all domains with some superset of functionality that works for most people. And I think that's what we should really focus on. The question is, will entrenched players in this industry ever come up with a system like that, or where will it and where should it come from?
Great. I think we're coming to the end of our time. So I want to ask one last question here to everybody. It's clear that we are oversubscribed, and that's, as Fernando said, there's the publish and perish model that's funding a basically impossible task for peer review. You have a system where it's been proposed that we have some papers, some large 70% of papers don't get peer reviewed at all. Would you trust a system? So the question I want to ask each panelist is, would you trust a system where you had an AI that you didn't have a no publication peer review, but each paper would go through an initial AI peer review? And then anything from there that recognized it as something more would then go into the true peer review system. The rest would just go into some preprint server. Would that be a system that would be trustworthy and viable? Maybe we can start with Fernando.
If I had an answer to that, like, I would say, yes, we should try, at least do an experiment and try that. It's not entirely clear to me what you do if the AI tells you, well, I would not send the paper automatically to a preprint server if it's not accepted and to go next to the other thing, but I would rather reiterate back at least once more with the authors, with the comments from the AI, and then retry it again. So do it in a double pass, and then pass it to humans.
Boyana.
I think it's so dependent on what the parameters are in the AI program, what the AI is looking for. I think different researchers read papers very differently, and they extract information from papers differently, and they only care about certain parts of the paper. If there were a way for individuals to be able to program what they're most interested in, and then be able to, basically data and text mine across all platforms, that would be the best, right? So I think I'm very intrigued by it. I'm hoping that people much smarter than me will, take this on as a challenge. I think it's going to need to be obviously incredibly iterative, but also it'll have to, on some level, be customizable and should be customizable for the reader.
Right, Mads?
Yeah, well, I was waiting for the right moment to pitch what we're currently doing in my startup, and I think
you've got 1.5 minutes.
Boyana, you did it perfectly.
Oh, excellent.
That is what we're trying to do. We are trying to create a reading and dissemination experience that can maybe help some of this. We're feel free to go to paperflow.ai to sign up, and we'll let you in when we have something that is a little more than our current prototype. We are essentially hoping to help incentivize the right people to join in commentary and vetting and question answering and using AI to facilitate conversations around papers across all domains, but realizing that some domains have a much higher velocity than others, and that some domains also require longer time to basically digest. But I think that one of the things that we aim to change is moving from like passive consumption of whatever turns up in your feed to a sort of breadth first approach where you can skim not just the stuff in your immediate feed, but also with the aid of AI, following along on maybe adjacent domains and basically helping you potentially have serendipitous experiences using heavily summarized feeds of content that you can control. So that's kind of the pitch, and we hope that it will be a good supplement to the current dissemination models. We think that something is lacking here. There are so many preprint servers out there with varying degrees of reading experiences that will fit any sort of reading format, and we think we need a standardized reading experience, and we don't think that the current apps are doing a good enough job. So stay tuned.
Great, thank you, Mads. Finally, Marco.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. I'm definitely interested into something like that. I will see, going back to your question, David, also supporting Boyana points. We need a tool that is kind of journal based, so every editor-in-chief can set up the threshold, depending on the journal that they're managing. And then I will see initially an AI tool that does the pre-screening as a managing editor, doing a suggestion to the editor. So we're not letting AI reject anything, but it gives the editor a suggestion. This can go to peer review. This should go back to the authors. This, is not interesting for the journal. And then quickly, the editor-in-chief can assess the paper, read the abstract, read the AI bits, and then get a decision faster. So that's I definitely see something as the near future, let's say.
Great. I'm sorry, Mads. I'm going to have to, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going to have to call it. I appreciate the passion and the intrigue, but it's been an absolutely fantastic hour. It's gone on. I think a lot of very interesting things have been and controversial being raised. Some things I've not heard before. I think one of the scariest things I've heard today is that two reviewers reviewing the same proposal have a correlation of 0.2, which is a rather scary thought. But it's clear that ChatGPT is here, and it definitely could aid us in a customizable way to help take the load off peer review through potentially reducing the number of papers that actually see the desk of humans directly. This is quite an exciting time, I think, for peer review in this sense, and there are people on this panel and outside that are really driving innovation and new ideas to really try and maybe not completely change peer review, but maybe redirect it in a way that makes it better for everybody, so that we can read better science, trust better science, and understand the science. I want to thank all the panel members today for their contributions and your questions from the audience. And I want to thank you again, and hopefully happy peer reviewing all, and go to paperworks.ai and profi.science for hosting this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Bye, guys.